Hey guys, tonight we step back over 2,000 years to a time when China was a patchwork of warring kingdoms, rivers cutting through landscapes as wild as your imagination allows, and a man, ambitious, terrified of death, and utterly relentless, was about to change everything. You trudge along the dust-choked roads of the old Zhou territories, feeling the heat bounce off clay walls, smelling smoke from distant village hearths, when suddenly the first emperor's shadow looms over the land. This is Qin Shi Huang. He doesn't merely want to rule. He wants to become immortal, his name echoing beyond time. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, but at least you'll have a front row seat to obsession in action. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time down below. Maybe we'll discover tonight that the idea of eternity feels different, whether you're sipping tea in Xi'an or lying awake somewhere in California. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking beside him, almost. Imagine the young Ying Zheng, a prince thrust onto a chessboard of intrigue at age 13, suddenly carrying the weight of conquest, propaganda, and paranoia. His father dies, leaving a kingdom still fraying at the edges, and Ying Zheng sets about consolidating power with a mixture of brilliance and ruthlessness that would make a modern CEO look like a preschool teacher. The smell of ink and bamboo scrolls fills your nose as decrees fly across court officials detailing laws, punishments, and absurdly ambitious infrastructure projects. Historian consensus says he achieved unification in 221 BCE, making him the first emperor to hold all of China under one rule. Quirky, right? Somewhere in his palace, a perfumer is mixing fragrances to cover the scent of human sweat and fear. A luxury touch for a man obsessed with controlling every detail. The reality is, Qin Shi Huang isn't just a ruler. He's a machine for legacy. His dream is monumental. Roads stretching like arteries across the country. Standardized currency that jingles differently in every pocket. Weights and measures uniform. Scripts unified. And laws etched into bronze. You can almost hear the echo of hammer on metal, the clatter of wheels over stone-paved highways, and the quiet groan of peasant backs bent under the yoke of progress. Historians still argue whether his reforms were primarily for efficiency or sheer domination. Either way, he's obsessed, and obsession brings invention. You notice that while other rulers sit in gilded halls, he prowls the corridors, eyes sharp, planning the next campaign. He dreams not just of conquering lands, but conquering time itself. He wants immortality. You probably imagined magic elixirs, mystical caves, or rivers of youth, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong. Alchemists roam his court, mixing strange minerals and herbs, some of them poisonous, promising longevity that no mere mortal has ever achieved. This fascination with living forever is both tragic and fascinating. He's a man literally building an empire out of the fear of decay. Step closer and feel it. Every wall is a whisper, every courtyard a rehearsal for eternity. You smell incense, metallic and bitter, drifting past iron doors. and hear the distant hammering of artisans, shaping bronze and clay into forms you cannot yet comprehend. Even in these early years, there's talk of a tomb so vast it could rival the heavens, filled with treasures, guardians, and terracotta soldiers frozen mid-battle. You pause for a moment to picture this army, life-sized, meticulous, and endless. Imagine knowing, deep in your bones, that someone you've never met is trying to control not just your life, but your death and beyond. But don't let this overwhelm you. He's only just starting. You feel the pull of inevitability, the rhythm of a nation marching to the drumbeat of one man's obsession. His dream is seductive, terrifying, and impossibly large. And yet, for all his brilliance, there's something achingly human in his fear, something that reaches across centuries and whispers to anyone who's ever worried about leaving a mark on the world. Even as you walk away from the bustling capital streets and peek into the dim corridors of his palace, you can't help but notice the tension. Eunuchs scurry like ants. Courtiers bow until their spines ache. And somewhere in the inner sanctum, the emperor sketches maps of mountains, rivers, and tombs, tracing paths where no one else will ever walk. He wants China to be a single, unified entity, and he wants his death to be just another step in that permanence. Quirky detail. Some texts claim he carried a personal entourage of about 1,000 concubines and attendants wherever he traveled, more like a walking city than a human being. And so you follow him, silently witnessing the birth of ambition so vast it will ripple across the centuries. His dream is more than conquest. It's a blueprint for eternity, etched in ink, blood, sweat, and eventually clay. Historians still argue whether Qin Shi Huang truly understood the scale of his ambition, or if he simply acted out of fear and superstition. Either way, you feel it. A tremor, faint but insistent, that this man will do whatever it takes to make time his servant. You pause at a balcony overlooking the city, smell the dust of the marketplace, mixing with the scent of pine torches, hear the faint strains of a ceremonial drum, and realize that this is the moment before history bends. You're standing at the edge of a dream, so enormous, so meticulous, that even the act of imagining it strains the mind. The first emperor is awake, alive, restless, and the world, whether it knows it or not, is about to change forever. You trudge along the newly paved highways of Qin, dust rising around your ankles as the clang of iron on iron echoes from distant workshops. Empire forged. In iron isn't just a metaphor here. You can smell the molten metal, feel the vibrations of hammers striking bronze weapons, and taste the grit on your tongue. This is the unification of China in action, a relentless machine of discipline, law, and brutality that Qin Shi Huang controls with a gaze sharp enough to make even seasoned generals flinch. If you thought the first emperor's dream was just about immortality, think again. He wants an empire carved in steel and obedience. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this particular lesson in efficiency, but at least you'll see what forged in iron really means. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to leave your location and local time, because tonight, whether you're under neon lights or a soft lamp, you're walking in the shadow of Qin's armies. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice as you follow Qin Shi Huang's campaigns is scale. The armies are immense, far larger than you've seen elsewhere. Thousands of infantry, archers, and cavalry march in perfect formation, shields polished to mirror sheen, their leather tunics stiff from the wax that keeps them in line. Horses snort and stamp, nostrils flaring with the metallic tang of iron bits. The first emperor standardizes weapons across the realm: swords, spears, crossbows, so a soldier from the far north can fit seamlessly into a regiment from the south. Historians confirm that this military standardization was revolutionary, turning disparate warring states into a cohesive, lethal force. Quirky, but true. Some of the crossbows were so precisely engineered that they could pierce armor from 100 paces, and yet each bolt was handmade, slightly different, giving every archer a tiny, personal signature in battle. You walk beside the general of the army, or perhaps it's the emperor himself, invisible in the shadows, commanding logistics with a notebook and a sharp eye. Roads stretch like arteries from one province to another, each stone laid to carry soldiers, carts, and messages with unflinching speed. Qin Shi Huang has a fascination with mobility, armies that can move like water, striking swiftly and unexpectedly. You hear rumors whispered among the soldiers. The emperor sees all, even from miles away, and wonder if it's superstition or simply the genius of a ruler obsessed with order. The conquest of the remaining warring states is relentless. Cities fall, walls are dismantled, and leaders either submit or vanish. Peasants are conscripted, not just as soldiers, but as laborers, building fortifications, digging canals, and laying the foundations for imperial infrastructure that will endure centuries. Historians still argue whether this consolidation was primarily strategic or a terrifying demonstration of absolute power. You feel the fear in the air, taste it in the sweat of soldiers and laborers alike. The first emperor's presence is a constant pulse, a reminder that resistance is not just futile, it's invisible in the face of his machinery. And the machinery extends beyond the battlefield. Standardized measurements, uniform coinage, and even a unified script sweep through the empire like a river of ink. Imagine, for a moment, trying to read a letter from your neighbor, only to find that every symbol has been altered. Then suddenly, poof, everything aligns, and commerce flows smoothly. Quirky detail. Some officials carried miniature bamboo slips in their sleeves to convert between old scripts and the new standardized characters. It's a convenience, yes, but also a subtle reminder that the emperor's eye watches every word you write. You trudge past workshops where artisans forge bronze mirrors, ceremonial armor, and the occasional miniature chariot, each piece stamped with the seal of Qin. The echo of hammers is hypnotic, almost musical, and yet there's a sinister undertone. Each clang could be the last sound a dissenter hears, There's a methodical cruelty here, a merging of efficiency and intimidation that makes even the most loyal soldiers glance over their shoulders. Historians still argue whether Qin's brutality was necessary to unify China or if it simply satisfied a ruler's compulsion for control. Either way, the empire is reshaping itself in the image of iron, obedience, and unflinching order. And then you notice the paradox. In villages across the empire, merchants carry coins stamped with the emperor's likeness. Farmers march along standardized roads, and soldiers drill under a single, unified banner. And yet, in the quiet moments between campaigns, whispers persist. Rumors of poisoned rivers, secret prisons, and people disappearing without trace. The first emperor's reach is extraordinary, but so too is the tension simmering beneath the surface. You can almost hear history itself, holding its breath, waiting for the first crack in the polished surface. By nightfall, the smell of smoke from campfires mingles with the metallic tang of iron, and you realize that Qin Shi Huang's dream isn't merely to rule, it's to forge permanence. Every sword, every wall, every regiment is a testament to a vision that sees time as something to be dominated, manipulated, and ultimately conquered. You stand in the shadow of this empire of iron and understand the scale of obsession it takes to unite a continent. Quirky aside, some soldiers reportedly carried small clay figurines of their families hidden under their armor for luck. Tiny reminders of home amidst the machinery of war. And yet, as impressive as it is, you sense that this is just the beginning. Qin Shi Huang's empire, rigid and gleaming, cannot last forever, but the echoes of its iron will ripple across centuries, setting the stage for the greatest spectacle of all. An army of clay, frozen in time, guarding a man who refused to accept death. You trudge through the corridors of the first emperor's mind, and strangely, his fears are more vivid than any army you've witnessed. Obsessed with death, Qin Shi Huang isn't just worried about enemies or rebellion. He's terrified of ceasing to exist. You can almost smell the metallic tang of alchemical experiments. See smoke curling around tiny crucibles where toxic minerals are boiled into elixirs, promising eternal life. It's a paranoia that gnaws at every decision, every march, every edict. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive his obsession if it touches your soul. But you'll witness a man utterly devoted to cheating the one enemy none can escape. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And leave your location and local time. It matters, because tonight, whether it's midnight or early morning, you're walking inside a mind that fears sleep as much as death. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. He hunts for immortality as a general hunts a foe. You see him sending envoys to distant islands, summoning alchemists from across the land, instructing them to distill elixirs that supposedly make the body impervious to decay. Mercury, cinnabar, rare herbs. He samples them all, with little concern for the poisoning that comes as a side effect. Mainstream historians note that Qin Shi Huang's obsession with immortality is well documented in Sima Qian's records of the grand historian, detailing how he traveled with a fleet of vessels along rivers, searching for the elixir of life. Quirky detail. Some sources suggest he believed magical copper and jade pills could turn his body into stone and metal, letting him literally outlast mortals. You follow him to his gardens, which are not just ornamental, but laboratories of death avoidance. Exotic plants, fountains of quicksilver, mercury, and miniature mountains filled with hidden passages. He treats his estate like a microcosm of eternity. The courtiers tiptoe around these experiments, aware that mistakes might lead to punishment, or worse. Historians still argue whether these excursions were sincere quests for eternal life, or more about displaying the emperor's control over nature and people alike. Either way, the obsessive rhythms of his daily routines feel both ingenious and unsettling. The irony is striking. He builds an empire of iron and law, yet he fears his own body's fragility. You can almost feel the tension. Ministers whisper in fear. Eunuchs scurry with bottles of mercury-laced elixirs. Artisans craft tiny vessels meant to house the divine essence. And in the midst of it all, Qin Shi Huang orders the construction of massive tombs, each a labyrinth of traps, treasures, and guardians, because death is a problem he intends to negotiate rather than accept. Quirky, but true. Some historians note that mercury levels found in soil samples around the tomb site are extraordinarily high, suggesting rivers of liquid mercury might have been engineered as part of his protective enchantments. The paranoia stretches further. He doesn't merely fear natural death. He fears assassination, poisoning, even curses from the earth itself. You notice that every hallway in his palace is lined with secret passages. Every throne room has hidden exits, and guards are rotated frequently to avoid predictable patterns. Historians still argue whether his fear of assassination was justified or a symptom of profound anxiety fueled by absolute power. Either way, the spectacle is mesmerizing. You're a ghost in a palace where trust has no foothold. And then there's the human cost. People vanish, perhaps permanently, in pursuit of his longevity projects. You walk past workshops where artisans grind minerals for elixirs, back-breaking labor powered by fear as much as duty. Entire fleets of vessels, massive convoys, and armies are mobilized not for conquest, but to locate Immortality's secret. You can almost hear the murmurs of those who survive the Emperor's scrutiny. He wants to live forever, yet he cannot care for the living. By nightfall, the Emperor's obsession seeps into the air itself. Lamps burn low as scribes copy spells and formulas. Alchemists work by the faint glow of mercury reflections, and eunuchs whisper secrets into jade vessels. His dreams are maps, charts, and blueprints of life beyond death. You feel it in your chest, a pulse, like the heartbeat of someone trying to outrun time. Quirky aside, some accounts claim Qin Shi Huang sent men to the mythical Penglai Island in search of immortals, a journey blending geography, myth, and the desperate logic of a mind terrified of mortality. You sense the tension between brilliance and madness. His empire thrives, yet everything is a rehearsal for the final act, death. His obsession with avoiding it drives construction, innovation, and cruelty, weaving together the terrifying and the awe-inspiring. Historians still argue whether his obsession with death shaped the Terracotta Army, or if it was primarily a symbolic demonstration of his absolute dominion. But you, walking among incense smoke and flickering lanterns, know this: obsession is a double-edged sword, crafting empires and nightmares simultaneously. And so, as you step back from the Emperor's private laboratories and gardens, you feel the full weight of the paradox. He has conquered men, rivers, and roads, yet time itself remains unconquered. The desire to escape death drives every stroke of policy, every march of soldiers, and every hammer striking clay that will eventually form the silent guardians of eternity. You are witnessing not just a man, but the birth of a legend, a shadow stretching across millennia, warning anyone who follows that obsession and fear can shape history as surely as armies and iron. You trudge past the smoky gardens, lingering on the faint metallic tang of mercury still hanging in the air, and step into the heart of Qin Shi Huang's grandest obsession yet, the blueprint of a tomb. The emperor doesn't just want a burial site, he wants an entire city underground, a place where rivers of mercury flow, the halls echo with music that never dies, and armies of clay stand eternal watch. Spoiler alert: you probably won't survive the claustrophobia of imagining it, but at least you'll glimpse the scale of human ambition turned inward toward the dead. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to leave your location and local time, because tonight, whether you're under a ceiling fan or a starry sky, you're following the designs of a man who refuses to accept death. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are peering over scrolls, ink barely dry, as the Emperor and his engineers plot an underground palace more elaborate than any city above. Enormous chambers, connected by hidden corridors, filled with treasures, sacrificial figurines, and symbolic miniatures of his empire. Every detail is scaled to perfection, every measurement meant to impress both the living and the dead. Mainstream historians confirm that the tomb spans an area of more than 20 square kilometers, practically a city beneath the soil. Quirky tidbit: some blueprints apparently included miniature rivers and lakes designed to mimic the real terrain above, complete with bronze boats. You wander through the imagined subterranean avenues, tracing your fingers along the lines drawn by artisans and architects. The Emperor wants immortality mirrored in architecture. He believes that by replicating his empire below ground, he will control it even in death. Imagine courtyards lined with columns, chambers for servants, real or figurative, and spaces for ceremonies that will never be held. Historians still argue whether the tomb was conceived primarily as a protective fortress for his afterlife, or as a symbol of earthly dominance projected into eternity. Either way, you feel the sheer ambition pressing on your chest Every corridor has a purpose. Some rooms are planned for archives and texts, others for treasures that would rival anything in life. You notice tiny niches for personal items, ceremonial vessels, and jade figurines, small, delicate, painstakingly crafted. Artisans spend years perfecting models of his empire to be buried alongside him. Quirky, but true. Some blueprints suggest that the tomb included representations of mountains, rivers, and even mythical animals, meant to protect the emperor's soul. The attention to detail is astonishing, and yet chilling. It's one thing to design a palace, another to build one that is never meant to be seen by human eyes again. You pause over the central chamber, imagining a throne surrounded by corridors that spiral outwards, each passage a trap or a symbolic threshold. The emperor wants control even after death. You can almost hear him whispering to his advisors, "No one enters without my permission." It's a paradox. Absolute openness to the afterlife. Absolute secrecy in the present. The air smells faintly of ink, clay dust, and candle smoke as you trace these hidden designs, realizing that every line on these blueprints represents both genius and paranoia, and the scale is almost unimaginable. Entire battalions of artisans, masons, and laborers labor under the sun to translate these blueprints into reality, shaping clay, carving stone, and lining subterranean rivers with mercury. Historians still argue whether the rivers of mercury were primarily protective, symbolic, or just the result of the emperor's alchemical obsession. Quirky note: some texts suggest that the levels of mercury in soil samples near the tomb might reflect attempts to mimic celestial rivers. Yes, he literally wanted the heavens underground. You wander deeper into the vision. Underground stables, clay horses poised mid-gallop, bronze weapons glinting in imagined torchlight, and corridors extending beyond sight. The emperor plans not only for protection from robbers, but also for immortality in a physical, almost theatrical sense. Every room is a statement. Power cannot be stolen, not even by death. You can almost feel the claustrophobic weight of this ambition pressing down, the gravity of decades of labor and secrecy shaping tunnels that reach into the dark earth. Even as construction begins, small details dominate the emperor's attention. Statues are measured, faces individualized, weapons perfectly aligned. Workers, peasants, and craftsmen are given specific instructions down to the smallest clay curl of a warrior's hair or the precise bend of an arrow. Quirky aside, artisans were sometimes forced to eat, sleep, and train near the tomb site for years to maintain continuity in design, essentially living in the blueprint itself. By sunset, the mausoleum is no longer just a plan. It is becoming a living labyrinth, a city within stone and earth. You step back, imagining the subterranean world swelling beneath the landscape, rivers of quicksilver catching the faint glow of lanterns, halls echoing with the imagined footsteps of soldiers who will never breathe. The first emperor's vision is terrifying in its perfection, a bridge between life and death that no one else can cross. And yet, for all its detail and control, it is still haunted by uncertainty. as if even the most meticulous planning cannot tame time or mortality. You breathe in dust and dreams, sensing that this blueprint is more than a tomb. It is an obsession incarnate, a monument to a man who wanted to dominate not just men, but death itself. And as you leave the imagined corridors behind, you realize that the first emperor's vision will demand not only clay and bronze, but the lives, sweat, and creativity of thousands, all pressed into service for eternity. You trudge along the bustling, dusty roads leading to the tomb site, and suddenly, the human scale of Qin Shi Huang's vision hits you. Peasants to builders, thousands of ordinary people, farmers and conscripts, march like living clay under the sun, their hands blistered, backs aching, as they are transformed into instruments of a single, colossal ambition. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive a day in their sandals, but at least you'll feel the pulse of labor that literally shaped eternity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And make sure to leave your location and local time. Whether you're watching this under lamplight or moonlight, you're standing among the shadows of history's heaviest workloads. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You notice the organized chaos. Thousands of people, men, women, and sometimes even children, sweat in rhythm with the cracking sun. Farmers plucked from their fields now dig, haul, mold, and carve clay, stone, and wood. Labor is regimented with military precision, overseen by foremen whose whistles slice the air like arrows. Mainstream historians estimate that construction of the mausoleum employed hundreds of thousands, some suggesting as many as 700,000 workers over decades. Quirky tidbit. Some of these workers reportedly brought small charms or figurines from home to keep themselves protected from the wrath of the first emperor. Blending superstition with survival, you trudge alongside them, feeling the dust cling to sweat-soaked skin, listening to the rhythmic clanging of hammers and the wet slap of clay being pressed into molds. Entire workshops are set up for specialized tasks. One team sculpts limbs, another fashions armor, another carves faces. Each worker contributes a tiny piece to a monumental puzzle. The air smells of wet earth, fired clay, and iron, and the occasional waft of incense, meant to pacify both spirits and laborers. Historians still argue whether these workers were primarily coerced by punishment or motivated by the promise of imperial favor. But the sheer scale of mobilization is indisputable, and there's a rhythm to their toil that is almost hypnotic. You can almost see the pulse of thousands of lives beating in unison, turning raw earth into soldiers frozen for eternity. Some workdays stretch from before sunrise until stars prick the sky. Breaks are rare and accidents frequent. Quirky aside, a few laborers apparently left tiny hidden marks on their clay figures, like graffiti, an ancient signature of "I was here," though few would ever witness these personal touches. The emperor himself occasionally visits the site, inspecting progress with eyes like sharpened obsidian. You can feel the tension in the air as overseers ensure that every figure, every weapon, every corridor aligns with the master plan. It is brutal, precise, and oddly mesmerizing. Men wielding spades and chisels become more than workers. They are participants in a collective vision that straddles the line between artistry and slavery. Historians still argue whether the emperor intended the labor to serve practical needs, spiritual protection, or both. But the physical and psychological demands are undeniable. You trudge past temporary villages erected to house the workforce. Simple huts built from timber and mud line narrow lanes, smoke rising from cooking fires. Peasant families watch from a distance, some resigned, some hopeful that service might bring recognition, some quietly plotting escape. You catch snippets of song and chatter, a reminder that life, even under iron control, finds small, defiant ways to persist. Quirky fact: some sources suggest workers were rotated so frequently that they never grew attached to a single section of the tomb, preventing familiarity that might lead to sabotage or dissent. You watch the transformation: raw, unshaped people slowly sculpted into the hands of destiny. They dig tunnels, carve bricks, mold clay figures, and carry them to the central chambers. Sweat, dust, and determination mix in a haze above the excavation pits. Even minor mistakes are costly. A misaligned soldier or crooked corridor can result in hours of extra work or punishment. And yet, a strange camaraderie forms among the laborers, a shared sense of endurance in the face of monumental ambition. By dusk, the site is a living, breathing organism sprawling across the landscape, a mesh of tunnels, pits, workshops, and temporary housing. You step back and sense the immense coordination required to sustain such an enterprise. Workers toil in nearly unbearable conditions, driven by obligation, fear, and perhaps a flicker of pride. Quirky aside, archaeologists have found inscriptions suggesting some laborers secretly recorded names and dates on bricks, tiny echoes of humanity beneath the empire's shadow. As night falls, you feel the weight of human effort pressed into the earth. Peasants, once anonymous, have become the sculptors of history itself, their labor immortalized in clay, their sweat embedded in every corridor and chamber. And as you leave the worksite behind, you understand the paradox of Qin Shi Huang's vision. It demands the ultimate sacrifice of the living to protect the empire in death. The first whispers of the Terracotta Army are taking shape, brick by painstaking brick, soldier by soldier, under the relentless sun of ambition and fear. You trudge past the laborers' huts, the smell of clay and wet earth thick in the air, and step into the bustling workshops where clay becomes flesh. Here, life-sized warriors slowly emerge from the raw earth, molded by hands, blistered, stained, and unimaginably precise. Spoiler alert: you probably won't survive the hours of watching artisans push, pinch, and sculpt each soldier into existence. But the experience is hypnotic, a ballet of human skill, animating what will one day guard a tomb forever. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time, because tonight, wherever you are, you're following fingers and tools that will echo through millennia. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that strikes you is scale. Thousands of figures, each roughly human height, sit in rows across long earthen platforms. Artisans work in teams. One shapes the torso, another the limbs, yet another adds the finer details of hands, armor, and facial expression. The clay is carefully mixed with minerals, straw, and water to ensure durability, then fired in massive kilns that billow smoke into the sky. Mainstream historians estimate that over 700,000 workers, laborers, artisans, and support staff combined participated in creating the Terracotta Army, a staggering number for a single project. Quirky detail, some workshops apparently use the hollow technique, making the figures partially empty inside to reduce firing breakage. Yet they were sturdy enough to survive thousands of years. You watch as an artisan presses clay over a preformed wooden frame, fingers moving almost instinctively. A head is carefully attached, ears adjusted, eyes sculpted to gaze out at eternity. Each soldier is unique, different height, hairstyle, facial expression, and even stance. Historians still argue whether this diversity was intended to reflect real units from Qin Shi Huang's army, or simply to give a lifelike appearance. But the effect is mesmerizing. You feel the quiet awe of seeing hundreds of men frozen mid-step, mid-breath, frozen as if they might spring into motion at any second. And it isn't just the soldiers. Horses are molded with equally painstaking care, muscles tensed, veins etched, tails flowing as though stirred by a breeze that exists only in imagination. Chariots are built from wood and clay, sometimes complete with bronze fittings and harnesses. Quirky aside, a few horses even have individualized teeth carved in, a detail only the most attentive observer or the most patient archaeologist might notice. The artisans themselves are astonishing in their focus. They've internalized the emperor's vision to such a degree that mistakes are almost non-existent, and even the smallest imperfection could result in days of corrections. You can smell wet clay, see streaks of glaze drying in the sun, and hear the muted tap-tap of sculpting tools. Even the youngest apprentices understand that every line, curl, and crease carries weight, not only for the visual effect, but for the spiritual protection of the emperor's tomb. Historians still argue whether these workshops functioned under strict coercion, intense pride, or a mix of both. Either way, the devotion is tangible. You trudge past rows of finished torsos awaiting heads, the air thick with anticipation and dust. Some workers add minute armor plates, etched patterns, and personal touches, almost like signing a painting, leaving faint signatures on each figure's belt or collar. Quirky note: certain inscriptions discovered on the figures include names of the artisan teams, a rare, almost cheeky acknowledgement of those who will remain invisible to the world above. Firing is another ordeal. Kilns stretch for miles, each one carefully loaded to prevent cracking, each figure positioned so heat reaches every corner. You can see the smoke curling skyward, carrying with it the earthy aroma of baking clay and straw, and feel the vibrations as massive doors are hammered shut to retain heat. Once cooled, the soldiers emerge, hardened, lifelike, and ready for assembly in the underground tomb. You watch the sequence of creation: torso, limbs, head, hands, armor, weapons, then placement in the pits. It's almost ritualistic, a choreography of artistry and logistics. And yet, for all the perfection, there's an undercurrent of tension. The emperor's expectations are absolute. Mistakes could mean corrections, punishment, or worse. You can almost hear the whispers among the artisans. He wants them perfect, yet alive. By evening, the workshops glow in fading sunlight, rows upon rows of clay soldiers drying in the open air, their hollow eyes staring toward the horizon. The effort is monumental. Not just the hands shaping the figures, but the coordination of kilns, molds, transport, and placement. Quirky aside, some scholars believe the assembly process involved a form of early modular construction. Torsos, limbs, and heads created separately and combined later to speed production while maintaining individuality. And so, as you step back from the sculpting platforms, you feel the transformation. Raw earth has become flesh, imagination made concrete, and ordinary hands imbued with the power to create eternity. The Terracotta Army is no longer a blueprint, a dream, or a plan. It's becoming a silent host of guardians, standing ready to protect the first emperor, long before a single brick of the tomb itself has been lowered into the ground. You trudge past the last fired kilns and step into the eerie half-light of a massive assembly pit, where faces of an army stare back at you, frozen, mid-thought, mid-motion, mid-breath. Each terracotta soldier seems to hold a personality, a story, a spark of life. And you suddenly realize that no two faces are alike. Spoiler alert. You probably won't survive the unnerving intimacy of hundreds of clay eyes following your every move. But you'll witness one of history's most astonishing human collaborations. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And leave your location and local time down below. Tonight, your imagination walks among hundreds of individualized soldiers, their expressions frozen, their gazes eternal. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is variety. Faces are serious, stern, thoughtful, even slightly amused. Soldiers tilt their heads as though listening for commands. Generals appear lost in strategy. Some wear mustaches, some have full beards, some are clean-shaven. The level of realism is staggering. Mainstream historians agree that artisans used models of real soldiers, and perhaps even prisoners, to sculpt these faces, resulting in a mosaic of human traits so vivid it almost unnerves. Quirky detail. Some heads feature unique scars or missing teeth, a tiny nod to the real imperfections of the people they were modeled on. You trudge closer, and the craftsmanship overwhelms the senses. You can feel the subtle differences: high cheekbones, pronounced brows, different ear shapes, even the tiniest wrinkles around eyes that might have laughed once or frowned in worry. Each face is distinct because the emperor demanded individuality, perhaps to reflect the diversity of his army, or simply to make each soldier feel alive in its eternal vigil. Historians still argue whether the uniqueness was symbolic, practical, or purely aesthetic. Either way, the effect is almost hypnotic. And the realism isn't limited to facial expressions. Hands are positioned to hold imagined weapons with confidence. Torsos twist in a natural stance. Legs bend as though marching. You notice that soldiers in frontline pits have different expressions than those in command positions, as if the clay itself encodes hierarchy. Quirky aside, archaeologists have found traces of pigment on some faces, suggesting that the soldiers were originally painted in lifelike colors, though most have faded after centuries underground. You trudge along the rows, feeling a strange intimacy with these silent sentinels. There's a mix of awe and unease. The uncanny valley effect is undeniable. You imagine the artisans sculpting them, hundreds of hands guided by rigorous instruction, but allowing subtle variations to slip in, almost like fingerprints. Even the tiniest imperfections were deliberate or unavoidable, contributing to the army's eerie lifelikeness. Historians still argue whether the faces were meant to intimidate the dead, the living, or both. Some soldiers seem to gaze directly at you, their eyes hollow yet purposeful, creating an almost spiritual presence. You pause at a general stance, hands curled as if issuing orders, eyes sharp with strategy, face taut with authority. It is as though the clay itself breathes strategy, hierarchy, and vigilance. Quirky tidbit. Some researchers suggest that the generals' faces were modeled after Qin Shi Huang himself, giving him a final army that literally mirrors his control. And then there's the emotional resonance. Soldiers show tension, focus, even faint traces of fear, tiny artistic flourishes that suggest the artisans were not merely following orders, but imbuing clay with empathy, imagination, and perhaps subtle defiance. You notice a row of archers whose brows furrow, fingers curled for release, eyes fixed on some invisible horizon. It is not just an army, it is a frozen story, a human tapestry encoded in clay. By twilight, the pit is a forest of faces, each telling its own tale, each carrying a fragment of human experience. You step back, feeling dwarfed and strangely watched, understanding that Qin Shi Huang's obsession with individuality has created not just soldiers, but personalities in clay, capable of standing guard over eternity. Historians still argue whether the army was meant to serve as a spiritual escort, a symbolic projection of imperial power, or simply as an artistic triumph of the state. You breathe in dust and centuries, letting the reality of this human ingenuity sink in. For all the scale, the army is intimate, personal, and unnervingly lifelike. You realize that each gaze, each curve of a brow, each nuanced expression is a fragment of someone's world, a whisper of the people who lived, labored, and imagined alongside the first emperor. And as you trudge away from the rows of staring clay eyes, you sense the weight of that quiet, eternal vigilance, a testament to ambition, fear, and artistry intertwined in every molded face. You trudge past the last rows of warriors, the hollow eyes still tracking your movements, and step into a different kind of spectacle. Horses, chariots, weapons. Here, the army takes on motion and purpose, the tools of war sculpted and arranged with painstaking precision. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive the sensory overload of imagining hundreds of life-sized horses and gleaming bronze weapons poised for eternal battle. But you'll witness the craftsmanship and strategy that make the Terracotta Army more than just an art project. It's a full-scale, functional miniature of Qin Shi Huang's military might. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and leave your location and local time down below. Tonight, wherever you are, you're standing among soldiers frozen in clay, horses frozen mid-stride, and weapons sharpened for eternity. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You notice first, the horses, not just props, not just placeholders. They are robust, muscular, and lifelike, with veins etched into clay, nostrils flared, and tails sculpted in motion. They're poised to charge, yet frozen in a moment of anticipation. Mainstream historians note that the army includes hundreds of horses, many paired with chariots, creating an uncanny sense of readiness. Quirky detail. Some horses are hollow like their riders, likely to prevent cracking during firing. But the artisans went so far as to individually shape each hoof and eye, lending a lifelike realism rarely seen in pre-modern sculpture. Chariots are another marvel. Carved from wood and bronze, sometimes adorned with lacquer, they are proportionate, balanced, and detailed enough to suggest functionality. You can almost imagine a line of chariots rolling forward, wheels spinning, harnesses jingling. Historians still argue whether these chariots were built for ceremonial display or as accurate representations of battlefield technology. But the precision is undeniable. Quirky aside, some chariot fittings appear to have been designed to hold tiny figurines or ceremonial objects, blending artistry, utility, and ritual. Then come the weapons: spears, swords, halberds, and crossbows, each carefully positioned in a soldier's grip or nearby. The bronze glints faintly, even after millennia, evidence of the metallurgical skill Qin Shi Huang's empire demanded. You can practically hear the clink of arms as soldiers line up for inspection. Mainstream historians confirm that weapon standardization across the empire allowed armies from different regions to fight cohesively, a radical innovation for the time. Quirky fact: some weapons discovered still have intact mechanisms, including working crossbow triggers, suggesting that Qin artisans combined functionality with ceremonial design. You trudge along rows of archers, their hands frozen mid-draw, arrows ready to fly, horses positioned as though in a charge. The artisans captured movement, tension, and purpose, giving a sense that the army is alive, even in clay. Each piece, horse, chariot, weapon, is part of a coordinated whole, a snapshot of a battlefield that never existed above ground, but lives below. Historians still argue whether the army was modeled on actual military units or idealized versions of them. Either way, the attention to tactical detail is staggering. And then there's scale. Each pit is massive, long corridors lined with rows of soldiers and horses, chariots angled as if responding to orders. You can almost map out a battle plan just by standing in the center, imagining how each unit would move. Quirky aside, some pits include tiny clay doors and gates, suggesting that even the underground army had logistical considerations, an early nod to architectural and tactical planning combined. You pause beside a general, hand gripping a halberd, his horse poised mid-step, eyes fixed on a horizon you cannot see. The attention to detail is staggering. Veins, muscles, saddle straps, and weapon fittings, all meticulously crafted. It is as if the artisans were obsessed with creating a frozen, living snapshot of Qin Shi Huang's army at its peak. The tactile and visual realism is so pronounced that you almost expect a soldier to twitch, a horse to snort. Historians still argue whether these details were meant to inspire fear, serve spiritual protection, or simply demonstrate the emperor's power and sophistication. By dusk, the pits take on a cathedral-like atmosphere. Rows upon rows of soldiers, horses, and chariots stretch to the horizon, the metallic tang of bronze mingling with the earthy scent of fired clay. You can feel the enormity of human labor, the precision of artistic skill, and the weight of obsession pressing down. Quirky aside, some archaeologists suggest that the positioning of certain weapons was symbolic, representing command hierarchies or cosmic order, blending martial practicality with spiritual or ritual intent. And as you step back, you realize the army is more than a static monument. It's a microcosm of Qin Shi Huang's military world, meticulously ordered, choreographed, and frozen for eternity. Horses snort silently, chariots poised to roll, and bronze weapons gleam with silent menace, all awaiting commands that will never come, yet eternally ready. In clay and bronze, the first emperor's vision of unstoppable military power stands immortal, a testament to discipline, artistry, and obsession interwoven into a single underground tableau. You trudge down the narrow ladders leading into the lower pits, the air cooler, damp, and tinged with the earthy smell of centuries. And suddenly, you're enveloped by a hidden world below. Here, corridors twist and turn like a subterranean labyrinth. Chambers open into caverns, and the sheer scale of Qin Shi Huang's underground vision overwhelms your senses. Spoiler alert: you probably won't survive long without tripping over a soldier or two. But at least you'll see what it feels like to walk through the heart of an emperor's obsession. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and leave your location and local time tonight. Whether under a blanket or beneath streetlights, you're wandering among tunnels and chambers that have been hidden from human eyes for over 2 millennia. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that strikes you is the complexity. Pits are connected by passageways, some wide enough for horses and chariots, others narrow, winding, almost claustrophobic. Some chambers contain whole battalions in formation, others isolated generals and strategists, as though the underground world mirrors the organization of an entire empire above. Mainstream historians emphasize that the arrangement of the pits reflects Qin military hierarchy and strategic thinking, turning clay into a silent map of conquest. Quirky detail: some corridors include miniature staircases and ramps, suggesting that artisans imagined the army could move within the tomb. An almost playful, unrealizable mobility. You trudge along a corridor, past soldiers and horses, noticing small signs of human touch. Tool marks, fingerprints, even tiny inscriptions hidden behind armor plates. The artisans, working under extreme conditions, left these subtle traces, a quiet rebellion against being erased by time. Historians still argue whether these markings were accidental, signatures of pride, or perhaps symbolic protections for the afterlife. Either way, you feel the intimacy of human presence in an otherwise silent, monumental environment. Chambers open unexpectedly. Some display cavalry units, perfectly aligned. Others feature archers in mid-draw, their bows pointed down unseen enemies. Horses crouch as though ready to spring, chariots positioned to maneuver through imagined battlegrounds. Quirky aside, archaeologists have noted that the spatial arrangement of soldiers may correspond to celestial constellations, a cosmic order reflected underground, blending the emperor's obsession with death, divinity, and military precision. You notice the sheer variety in scale and purpose. Some pits are shallow, others deep, forming a tiered arrangement that might have made the army feel alive when first installed. Certain areas seem ceremonial, with more detailed figures and more elaborate positioning, suggesting that some soldiers were meant to be seen by the spirit world more than the living. Historians still argue whether these distinctions reflect rank, ritual importance, or artistic experimentation. The air is heavy with history. You can smell the fired clay, the lingering iron from weapons, and even a faint hint of mercury, likely remnants of the rivers that were supposed to flow through the tomb. Symbolic or practical, or both. Walking deeper, you notice chambers filled with figurines representing musicians, acrobats, and attendants, an entire mini-society frozen underground. Quirky detail. Some of these figures appear to have been painted in bright pigments, long faded, suggesting that the tomb was once a riot of color, almost like a miniature festival for the dead emperor. You trudge past the edges of pits, peering into vast spaces where soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder, perfectly aligned, as if ready for inspection. The scale is almost impossible to comprehend. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of life-sized figures meticulously arranged. You notice subtle variations in armor, facial expression, and weaponry, reinforcing individuality within uniformity. A paradox of control and personal detail. Historians still argue whether these differences were meant to honor real soldiers, symbolize the empire's diversity, or simply demonstrate the artisan's skill. The tunnels twist and open into hidden chambers, storage rooms for ceremonial objects, miniature representations of palaces, even tiny kitchens and stables. It's a self-contained world, mirroring life above ground, while remaining completely secret. You can almost imagine the first emperor walking silently along these corridors in spirit, inspecting his eternal forces. Quirky aside, some chambers may have included sound channels or acoustic designs, so that ritual chants or music from above ground could echo subtly below, blending sensory experience with spiritual practice. By evening, the hidden world below feels alive. Shadows dance along the walls, echoing footsteps amplify in the corridors, and the weight of centuries presses down. You realize that the tomb is not just a burial site. It's an entire underground city, a microcosm of Qin Shi Huang's empire, engineered for eternity. Every soldier, horse, chariot, and attendant has a place, and every place is designed with both military and spiritual intent. As you trudge back toward the faint light of the surface, you sense the magnitude of ambition, obsession, and artistry that went into creating this subterranean world. It is terrifying, beautiful, and utterly silent, a testament to a ruler who refused to surrender to mortality and who built an empire not only above ground, but hidden beneath it, waiting, watching, and eternal. You trudge along the shadowed corridors, leading away from the pits, and the weight of secrecy and sacrifice settles over you like the dust of centuries. Every hammer strike, every clay figure, every hidden passage embodies the paradox of Qin Shi Huang's vision, an obsession with immortality built on the suffering and silence of thousands. Spoiler alert. You probably won't survive the realization of just how much human cost went into this underground empire. But at least you'll feel it, lingering in the back of your mind, like the echo of 1,000 unheard voices. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and leave your location and local time. Tonight, whether it's midnight or afternoon, you're walking through the shadows of history's most carefully guarded secrets. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Secrecy is omnipresent. The tomb was constructed with hidden tunnels, false doors, and booby traps designed to keep tomb robbers, curious officials, and even the emperor's own servants from discovering its secrets. Workers were often rotated, isolated, or prevented from seeing the bigger picture of the project. Mainstream historians confirm that these measures were deliberate, designed to protect not only treasures, but also the emperor's control over life and death. Quirky detail. Some sources claim that laborers were forbidden from speaking about their work outside the site, and some were buried alive if they violated secrecy, though the truth of this remains debated. You trudge past workshops where artisans carve soldiers with meticulous precision, feeling the tension of enforced silence. Their fingers move instinctively, but their eyes betray exhaustion. Fear mixes with artistry. One wrong word, one misstep, and punishment could follow. Historians still argue whether the emperor's extreme secrecy was primarily about spiritual protection, political control, or sheer paranoia, but the effect is undeniable. The tomb becomes both sanctuary and prison, a place where loyalty is tested daily. And then there's sacrifice. Tens of thousands of workers, peasants, artisans, convicts, labored under harsh conditions for decades, their lives subsumed by the tomb's construction. You can almost feel their fatigue, their silent despair, their faint, fleeting moments of camaraderie and defiance. Quirky aside, some archaeologists suggest that workers may have left tiny graffiti or marks on the clay figures to record their presence, secret signatures that survived centuries of concealment. You pause to consider the hierarchy of sacrifice. Skilled artisans were both privileged and vulnerable, given greater creative freedom, but held to impossible standards. Laborers endured grueling physical work under strict supervision, often living in temporary encampments adjacent to the excavation pits. Children sometimes assisted in minor tasks, like preparing clay or mixing pigments, learning a craft in the shadow of mortality. Historians still argue whether these extreme labor conditions were standard for large imperial projects or uniquely brutal due to the emperor's obsession with immortality. The secrecy extends even to the tomb's final design. Mercury rivers, intricate traps, and hidden chambers were planned not just for protection from looters, but also to mystify and awe anyone who might survive entry. You can feel the tension in the air, the weight of unseen eyes watching, of centuries of knowledge locked away beneath tons of earth. Quirky tidbit. Soil analysis suggests extraordinarily high mercury concentrations at the site, lending credence to the idea that these rivers may have been functional or symbolic barriers against intruders. You trudge past rows of partially finished soldiers, each a testament to both skill and endurance. You notice the fingerprints left in the clay, the subtle variations in expression, and the way each figure seems to carry a whisper of the artisan's labor. The army is alive with the echoes of those who built it, yet invisible to the emperor once construction is complete. Historians still debate whether the human cost was consciously documented or considered a necessary price for eternity. And there's an eerie rhythm to the secrecy. Artisans whisper, overseers patrol, laborers exchange fleeting glances. Even small mistakes could have consequences, reinforcing a climate of quiet obedience. You feel the tension and cohesion, the simultaneous brilliance and cruelty required to orchestrate such a monumental undertaking. Quirky aside, some legends claim that certain workers were executed for attempting to record the tomb's plans in personal notebooks, a chilling reminder of the lengths taken to preserve mystery. By twilight, the magnitude of secrecy and sacrifice is palpable. The tomb is more than a resting place. It's a fortress of hidden knowledge, a monument built on human toil, and a symbol of an emperor's determination to control both life and death. You trudge back toward the surface, your senses heavy with dust, sweat, and the faint echoes of invisible voices, understanding that every corridor, every figure, and every buried river is the product of relentless labor, exacting secrecy and unquestionable devotion. The first emperor's vision is complete in concept, but built by countless human lives, their toil embedded in every clay soldier, every horse, and every carefully placed weapon. And as you leave the shadows of the tomb behind, you carry with you the haunting realization History's grandest achievements are often paved with both brilliance and suffering, intertwined in a silent, eternal testament to ambition. You trudge past the outer walls of the tomb complex, feeling the wind stir dust across the plateau, and imagine the emperor's last march, the final journey of Qin Shi Huang, from the bustle of life to the silence of eternity. The route is ceremonial, meticulously designed, lined with guards, courtiers, and the promise of immortality. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive the weight of imagining the emperor's paranoia, rituals, and final instructions. But you'll witness the closing act of a man determined to dominate both life and death. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to leave your location and local time. Tonight, wherever you are, you're walking alongside the specter of history's first emperor as he prepares for a journey that only he will complete. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The march begins at the Imperial Palace in Jianyang with a convoy of guards, attendants, and ritual specialists. Horses stamp impatiently on stone pavements. Banners flutter, and the air hums with a mixture of incense smoke, metallic tang from weapons, and the murmurs of those who serve the emperor. Mainstream historians note that Qin Shi Huang traveled extensively even late in life, seeking elixirs of immortality and consolidating power. This final march was both a culmination and a performance of imperial authority. Quirky detail: some accounts claim that the emperor's entourage carried small, portable replicas of his army and tomb models, almost like talismans meant to ensure safe passage to the afterlife. You trudge alongside this procession, imagining the emperor's golden carriage glinting in the sun, surrounded by loyal soldiers whose faces are a mixture of reverence and fear. Every step, every movement is planned, almost ritualistic. The emperor inspects, commands, and observes, even as illness or age weighs upon him. Historians still argue whether the extensive ceremonial elements were primarily intended for the living court or as preparation for the afterlife. But the interplay of politics, ritual, and obsession is unmistakable. And then there's the symbolism. Every mile of the journey is marked by ritual stations where offerings are made, ancestral spirits invoked, and protective charms displayed. You can almost see the banners snapping in the wind, each embroidered with symbols of power, eternity, and conquest. Quirky aside, some texts claim that entertainers and acrobats accompanied the emperor to amuse him and ward off spirits, creating a bizarre blend of theater, ceremony, and spiritual preparation. The route to the tomb plateau is more than physical. It is spiritual, psychological, and architectural. The emperor's entourage passes through carefully aligned gates and terraces, some of which mirror the design planned for the underground mausoleum. It is a rehearsal, a miniature enactment of the tomb itself. You trudge past courtyards lined with stone figures, guardians, and ceremonial objects, sensing the orchestration of every detail. Historians still argue whether these alignments reflect feng shui principles, military symbolism, or sheer imperial whim, but they create an undeniable aura of inevitability. You notice the emperor's meticulous attention to ritual, offerings of jade, bronze vessels, and food arranged along the route. Incense smoke curling upward, prayers whispered by attendants. His obsession with longevity manifests in small details, mercury-laced devices, miniature replicas of palaces and rivers, charms to ward off evil spirits. Quirky fact: some accounts claim that even animals in the procession were treated as sacred messengers, with horses adorned in protective amulets to carry the emperor safely to his tomb. You trudge past the last hills before the tomb plateau, feeling the physical exertion of the march, echo the emperor's own obsession with control. Soldiers maintain formation, attendants carry ceremonial items, and the emperor's aura dominates everything. You almost hear him muttering about conquest, eternity, and the fragility of mortal men. Historians still argue whether the final march was meant to assert dominance over his living subjects, reassure his court, or prepare spiritually for the afterlife. But it's clear it combines all three. As you arrive at the plateau, you sense the culmination of decades of planning and labor. The terrain mirrors the tomb's design, with pits, ceremonial terraces, and outlines of subterranean chambers prefigured in the earth. You can almost see the emperor envisioning his eternal city beneath your feet, troops arranged, rivers of mercury flowing, and the silent army awaiting him. Quirky aside, some sources suggest that ceremonial music played along the route was designed to harmonize with the tomb's acoustic chambers, creating a faint, ghostly resonance meant for eternity. By dusk, the last march concludes with the emperor entering his tomb, surrounded by secrecy, ritual, and devotion. You trudge back to the imagined site, sensing the completion of a life obsessed with power, control, and immortality. The meticulous army, the intricate tomb, the ceremonial preparations, all now converge into a single, silent testament. You feel the weight of history pressing down, understanding that this march was both literal and symbolic. The emperor's final command, a transition from the living world into a hidden empire of clay, bronze, and memory. And as you step away, the tableau lingers in your mind. The echo of hooves, the rustle of banners, the silence of eternity waiting below. The first emperor has completed his march, but his army remains forever frozen, guarding both the man and the vision he could not leave behind. You trudge back up from the plateau into the open air, the wind carrying loose dust across the construction zones, and suddenly sense rebellion in the dust. After Qin Shi Huang's death, the empire he forged with iron and clay quivers at the edges. Workers scatter, and the meticulously ordered world of the tomb faces chaos. Spoiler alert: you probably won't survive the anarchy that unfolds in the aftermath, but witnessing the tension between loyalty, survival, and upheaval gives you a visceral sense of human frailty beneath the veneer of imperial power. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video, and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and leave your location and local time, because tonight, wherever you are walking among the invisible traces of unrest, the unsettled dust of rebellion, and the echoes of fear and defiance. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first stirrings of rebellion are subtle, whispers spread among laborers. Some fear punishment, some hope to escape, some are emboldened by the emperor's absence. Mainstream historians note that the Qin dynasty quickly destabilized after Shi Huang's death in 210 BCE, with revolts breaking out across provinces. Soldiers desert, conscripts flee, and villages formerly bound by tribute or coercion suddenly see an opportunity to resist imperial control. Quirky detail: some workers reportedly buried tiny good luck charms or inscriptions under the clay figures. Tiny acts of defiance meant to protect themselves in the afterlife, or perhaps to curse the emperor. Though this is difficult to confirm, you trudge through the partially completed pits and construction zones, feeling the tension thick in the air. Some artisans abandon their work, leaving unfinished soldiers mid-sculpt, limbs awkwardly suspended. Horses topple, chariots lie askew, and the order that seemed eternal begins to crumble. Historians still argue whether these lapses were purely practical, due to fear and exhaustion, or symbolic, representing the fragility of human authority against the inevitability of mortality. Rebellion is not only physical, but psychological. Supervisors and foremen struggle to maintain discipline as chaos spreads. Punishments become unpredictable, sometimes arbitrary, creating a climate of terror. Quirky aside, some records suggest that certain pits were hastily sealed, bearing unfinished or defective soldiers with minimal attention to alignment, an unintentional mosaic of the empire's vulnerability. You trudge through makeshift camps where rumors fly faster than dust clouds. Soldiers and laborers exchange news of uprisings elsewhere, the collapse of imperial control, and the uncertain future of the tomb itself. Despite fear, there are flashes of ingenuity. Some workers hide small tools or charms, signaling to each other tiny networks of survival beneath the emperor's gaze. Historians still argue whether the collapse was primarily political, logistical, or a direct consequence of the emperor's extreme secrecy and labor policies. The rebellion spreads outward, engulfing nearby villages and regions. You imagine bands of desperate conscripts, once disciplined and obedient, now forming pockets of resistance, attacking supply lines, or simply fleeing into mountains and forests. Quirky detail: folklore hints at ghostly apparitions of clay soldiers watching deserters, likely stories meant to frighten escapees back into submission, or to explain inexplicable disappearances among laborers. Meanwhile, the tomb site itself teeters on the edge of ruin. Horses topple in shallow pits, unfinished generals lie scattered, and fragments of clay warriors litter the ground. You trudge carefully, stepping over half-formed figures, feeling the haunting presence of an interrupted vision. The human cost of both construction and rebellion is stark. Lives sacrificed for ambition, now disrupted by the impermanence of authority. Historians still debate whether the tomb's final arrangement reflects deliberate continuity despite chaos, or whether some pits were never fully completed due to unrest. You notice small acts of resilience amid the disorder. Some artisans continue working quietly, perhaps out of devotion, pride, or fear. Others cleverly disguise their departure, leaving completed soldiers in positions that mask the gaps in manpower. Quirky aside, in some areas, unfinished weapons were buried with the figures, perhaps as a hurried attempt to preserve the illusion of readiness, despite the social collapse above ground. By twilight, the dust settles enough to reveal the scale of disruption. The perfectly aligned army is now punctuated by chaos. Missing heads, skewed limbs, toppled horses. The ground carries the echo of human rebellion, the imprint of fear, courage, and survival instincts that challenged an empire's most carefully laid plans. You trudge away slowly, understanding that even the most monumental human achievement can be vulnerable to the unpredictability of life, mortality, and resistance. And as night falls across the plateau, the Terracotta Army stands in partial silence, a testament both to human skill and human fragility, to the triumph of vision and the rebellion of those who built it. The first emperor may be gone, but the traces of unrest remain embedded in clay, dust, and memory, a reminder that power, even immortalized in soldiers of fired earth, is never absolute. You trudge through the quiet aftermath of rebellion, the dust settling over toppled clay and scattered tools, and feel the profound stillness of buried and forgotten. The tomb, once alive with hammering, voices, and motion, now lies sealed in silence, hidden beneath tons of earth, waiting patiently for centuries to be rediscovered. Spoiler alert: you probably won't survive the sheer weight of imagining this vast, secreted world lying dormant, untouched by human eyes. But you can feel it pressing against your imagination, whispering of lost lives, lost labor, and lost ambition. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and leave your location and local time, because tonight, wherever you are, you're drifting through the shadows of a forgotten empire, walking alongside ghosts of both rulers and workers. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first sensation is emptiness. The pits, now roofed over and buried beneath meters of soil, hold rows upon rows of soldiers, horses, and chariots frozen mid-action, invisible to the world above. Mainstream historians note that the tomb remained undisturbed for over 2 millennia, surviving natural disasters, wars, and shifting dynasties. Quirky detail: legend claims that even local villagers spoke of ghost soldiers beneath the earth, but dismissed the stories as folklore until excavation confirmed the army's existence. You trudge along imagined corridors of buried clay, feeling the weight of both earth and time pressing down. Soldiers still stand at attention, their faces unchanged, their hands gripping invisible weapons, as if waiting for orders that will never come. Historians still argue whether the army's preservation was due to careful engineering, unfortunate burial conditions, or a combination of both. But the effect is nothing short of miraculous. And there's a strange intimacy in their forgotten state. Horses crouch in eternal readiness. Generals command from clay thrones, and attendants remain poised with their ritual instruments. Quirky aside, small traces of organic material, like straw used in the firing process, have survived in some soldiers, offering microscopic insights into ancient techniques and daily life that were buried alongside the emperor's ambition. You trudge past pits that were never fully completed. Some soldiers are missing limbs or heads. Chariots lie half-built. And yet, the army maintains a haunting cohesion, a testament to both planning and imperfection. The incompleteness gives the buried world a sense of quiet humanity. The laborers who built it were mortal, yet their creations endure. Historians still argue whether the unfinished sections reflect interruptions from rebellion, the emperor's death, or logistical constraints during construction. The tomb's concealment extends beyond the army. Mercury rivers, once envisioned to flow through underground channels, lie dormant. Hidden chambers await discovery. Inscriptions and symbolic artifacts remain silent. You imagine the underground labyrinth as a sealed city, a microcosm of Qin Shi Huang's empire, where everything and everyone is trapped in a suspended moment of time. Quirky detail. Some researchers suggest that the high mercury concentrations, possibly meant as protective barriers, may have actually contributed to preserving organic materials in ways not originally intended. You trudge along, feeling the eerie patience of buried objects. The silence of the tomb is not empty. It is full of expectation, a frozen tableau that remembers its creators even when they are gone. Soldiers, horses, and chariots lie in rows, invisible yet perfectly preserved, waiting for the day someone might peel back the soil and witness their perfection. Historians still debate whether Qin Shi Huang envisioned them as a spiritual army for eternity or as a demonstration of imperial might. But their immobility belies a profound narrative of ambition, labor, and mortality. By dusk, you sense the layers of history compressed into the earth. Above ground, empires rose and fell, dynasties splintered, and centuries passed. Yet below, the army remained untouched, silent, and vigilant. Quirky aside, during centuries of obscurity, local tales spoke of treasures and ghostly armies beneath the hills, blending legend and reality in ways that would captivate explorers and archaeologists millennia later. As you trudge away from the imagined surface of this buried world, you feel the paradox. The Terracotta Army is both monumental and intimate, eternal yet fragile, visible only to those who dig deep enough into the earth and into history, forgotten by the living, remembered by time. These soldiers, chariots, and horses continue their silent vigil, witnesses to ambition, obsession, and human ingenuity that even death could not erase. You ease into the hush of whispers across centuries, and the first thing you notice is that silence isn't really silent at all. Beneath the soil, above the pits, across the villages and fields that grew over the first emperor's burial mound, faint murmurs seem to carry from one century to the next. No one knew exactly what lay beneath, but stories always swirled. And as you sink deeper into your blanket, eyes fluttering at the edges of sleep, you can almost hear them. The villagers' gossip, the scholars' speculations, the faint clink of spades digging in the wrong direction. Before we begin, a gentle nudge. If you find yourself coming back to these bedtime histories, it helps me enormously if you subscribe. It's free, it's quick, and it makes sure you never miss the next whispered tale from the past. And of course, I'd love to know your local time and place in the comments. It's a delight seeing where in the world these stories find you. Now then, let's drift. Centuries rolled past after Qin Shi Huang's burial, and the world above forgot, but not entirely. The mainstream fact: by the Han Dynasty, less than 100 years after the emperor's death, historians were already writing about the tomb. Grand descriptions of rivers of mercury, palaces beneath the earth, and automatons guarding the chambers made their way into scrolls. But here's the quirky detail. Some writers admitted they hadn't seen any of it firsthand. Their accounts were half report, half rumor, and sometimes outright myth. Imagine playing a 2,000-year-long game of telephone, and yet the whispers never stopped. A farmer plowing near the mound would sometimes strike an old brick or a shard of tile. Children gathering firewood claimed the earth felt hollow in places. There were stories of foxes that disappeared into holes, never to be seen again, as though slipping into another world. Scholars argue to this day whether the stories were genuine memories passed down or just the human imagination running wild. You drift along with those whispers, passing through the Tang Dynasty, when poets wrote of the mighty emperor and his hidden city beneath the earth. Some sang of it with awe, others with scorn, painting him as a tyrant whose hubris left him trapped forever with clay companions. One debated detail: did later dynasties truly believe the army existed? Or did they take it as allegory, a story about ambition turned to dust? Even now, historians can't fully agree. Still, the murmurs survived in small ways. Quirky aside, during the Song Dynasty, a local county record noted unusual bronze and stone objects found near the mound, dismissed as curiosities rather than relics of something vast. Imagine being that bureaucrat, jotting down a note, unaware that you just brushed shoulders with the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century. You walk through centuries of peasants' footsteps, scholars' ink stains, passing whispers down the line. The tomb became less a fact than a ghost, part of the cultural memory of the region, half believed, half dismissed. And here's the eerie thing: though armies invaded, though dynasties crumbled, though entire capitals were rebuilt with the stone of fallen walls, the mound and its buried guardians remained untouched, their secret intact. Even in the Qing dynasty, whispers persisted. Travelers spoke of cursed soil that yielded strange fumes. Some villagers avoided building too close, claiming the ground hid restless spirits. Quirky detail: local superstition warned against digging wells near the mound because water drawn there tasted of metal. With hindsight, perhaps those people weren't entirely wrong. modern surveys did reveal abnormally high mercury traces in the soil, and so the whispers stretched like a thread across centuries, weaving together fact and legend. A historian here, a farmer there, a poet scribbling by lantern light. All of them unknowingly safeguarded the memory of something colossal. You feel the weight of those whispers as you lie still now, breathing slow. 2 millennia of voices humming faintly. Stories passed mouth to mouth, until finally, in the 20th century, the whispers would crescendo into a shout, the discovery that would shock the world awake to what had slept so long in silence. But that, my friend, is for another night. For now, let the whispers wash over you, centuries blending into the hum of your fan, the rhythm of your breathing. Close your eyes and imagine yourself as one of those storytellers, passing down a tale you can't quite prove, but can't quite forget either. And so, the Terracotta Army remained, buried, forgotten, yet never entirely gone, always there, beneath the soil, waiting for ears willing to listen to the whispers across centuries. You slip into this part of the tale, like easing into a dream that's been waiting for you for 2,000 years. The ground above the first emperor's hidden world has seen dynasties rise and fall, villages bloom and fade, fields tilled and tilled again. And then, one ordinary spring morning in 1974, it happened. Not with a roar, not with a fanfare, but with the steady scrape of iron on hard earth. Before we start digging alongside them, a gentle reminder: if these bedtime journeys keep you company, subscribing helps me keep building them for you. It costs nothing, but means everything. And as always, I'd love to know the time and place where you're listening from. It's like seeing the Terracotta Army come alive across the world. Now then, back to Shanxi province. It's March, the wind still carrying the last chill of winter, when a group of peasants in the village of Xiang decide to dig a well. The fields have been stubborn, water scarce, and what's more ordinary than a few farmers with shovels trying to coax life from the land? They're not looking for history. They're looking for a drink. The mainstream fact: in the process of digging, their shovels strike something strange. Not loose soil, not stone, but fragments of hardened clay. At first, it seems like pottery shards, the kind a farmer might shrug off and toss aside. After all, this land is old, and pottery breaks often. But then, one farmer pries up a piece the size of a palm and blinks. It isn't just clay, it's a nose. A very human-looking nose. Imagine being him, holding that fragment, brushing off the dirt, and realizing it looks eerily like part of a face. The quirky detail. According to some accounts, the villagers joked nervously about unearthing ghosts. One even muttered, "We've angered the ancestors." Another thought it might be a temple statue long since forgotten. What they didn't realize was that their little well-digging project had just poked the top of the greatest archaeological discovery of the century. Piece by piece, more emerged. A head here, an arm there, a broken torso. The farmers didn't yet see soldiers. They just saw fragments, scattered and incomplete, like a puzzle scattered across the dirt. But something about the scale unnerved them. These weren't tiny figurines. The shards belonged to figures life-sized or larger. Word spread quickly. Some say the villagers hesitated to report it, worried that disturbing the earth would bring misfortune. Others claim they hurried to the authorities, sensing the discovery's importance. Either way, local officials arrived, then county officials, then eventually archaeologists. And each layer of authority peeled back the soil with widening eyes. Here's a debated point among scholars. Were the first archaeologists skeptical at first, expecting only a handful of broken statues? Or did they suspect immediately they were standing on the edge of something monumental? Records vary, but what's certain is this: no one, not even the most ambitious, guessed at the scale. And oh, the scale. When careful excavation began, row upon row of warriors came into view. Archers crouching, generals standing proud, infantry lined shoulder to shoulder, as if waiting for a command that never came. Chariots buried alongside them, horses frozen mid-stride, the whole army encased in silence for millennia. The farmers, simple well, had opened a portal to the Qin dynasty itself. Now, let's pause here for a quirky fact. The farmer often credited with first striking clay was named Yang Jifa. For years afterward, he was occasionally brought out for ceremonies, interviews, even tours. But in the beginning, he didn't get fame or fortune. Instead, he and the others received a modest reward from the state, barely enough to buy a new bicycle. Imagine finding the Terracotta Army and being paid in the equivalent of lunch money, yet in a way that made it all the more poetic. The greatest discovery of modern Chinese archaeology wasn't made by scholars or treasure hunters, but by villagers with shovels, seeking water. As the pits widened, archaeologists realized the fragments weren't random. The broken figures hinted at entire vaults stretching beneath the earth, each soldier painstakingly crafted with unique features, lined in perfect military order. This wasn't just a burial, this was a statement. The first emperor had commanded that in death he would be guarded by the mightiest host the world had ever known. And now, in 1974, that army was marching once again, not across battlefields, but into history books. You can almost hear the scrape of the farmers' shovels, the gasp as a clay face looked back at them, the stunned silence of the first archaeologists, brushing dust from a soldier's cheekbone. After 2,000 years of whispers, the secret was no longer silent. The Terracotta Army had woken. You roll forward in time, from the farmers' shovels to the roar of bulldozers, trowels, and brushes. The ground that once hid an emperor's secret is now buzzing with activity. Archaeologists, workers, soldiers, officials, and even curious villagers leaning in just to get a glimpse of what's unfolding. The year is still 1974, though now we're moving past that first moment of discovery. The air is dry. Reddish dust hangs in the spring breeze, and each day more of the underground world is brought to light. Before we start brushing away history, a gentle nudge. Subscribing keeps these bedtime journeys alive. It costs nothing, but means the world. And I'd love to hear where you're listening from, your little corner of the earth. Now let's get back to digging. At first, the pits were small, test trenches, shallow cuts through the hard loam. The archaeologists weren't quite sure what they were dealing with. Broken heads, torsos, horse legs. It was all intriguing, but archaeology is cautious. You don't assume a whole army is beneath you. You start slow, but with every scrape of a trowel, the picture widened. And then, shock. A whole row of life-sized warriors came into view, still standing, still lined up in ranks, as though frozen mid-march. One soldier's armor bore the imprint of laces. Another's hair was coiled into a neat topknot, captured in baked clay. An archer crouched low, eyes sharp, as if watching you personally. The mainstream fact here, as excavation expanded, archaeologists realized there were not a dozen statues, not 100, not even 1,000. Estimates ballooned, eventually more than 8,000 warriors, over 600 horses, 130 chariots, and an unknown number of weapons, all buried in massive underground vaults. What the farmers thought was a broken statue was just the beginning of a subterranean empire. The quirky detail? Many of the statues were found in fragments, smashed when the roof beams collapsed long ago. For archaeologists, it was like piecing together the world's largest 3D puzzle, except each piece was heavy, filthy, and sharp-edged. Imagine working in a giant graveyard of clay arms, legs, and heads, trying to figure out which nose goes with which warrior. Some archaeologists joked that it felt less like science and more like running a repair shop for 2,000-year-old soldiers. There's a scholarly debate worth whispering about here. Who destroyed the vaults? Some argue the wooden roof beams simply collapsed over time. Others believe it was the rebels who overthrew the Qin dynasty, smashing what they could in revenge against the emperor. Still others think natural disasters, fires, floods, earthquakes, played their part. The evidence isn't neat, so the debate still simmers. What's certain, though, is that the figures weren't mass-produced in soulless uniformity. Each one had distinct facial features, hairstyles, even subtle differences in height and build. One soldier might have a proud mustache, curling at the ends, while another carried the sharp cheekbones of a young recruit. Archaeologists marveled. It was as though Qin Shi Huang had demanded not just an army, but individuality, a clay echo of real soldiers who once lived. And here's something that still gives historians goosebumps. When first uncovered, traces of paint remained. Brilliant reds, purples, and greens, armor painted in detail, lips tinted pink, eyes outlined in black. The Terracotta Army wasn't meant to be dull gray. It once shimmered with lifelike color. But tragically, the pigments disintegrated almost instantly upon contact with air. Imagine the heartbreak. Brushing away dirt to reveal a radiant, painted soldier, only to watch the colors vanish within minutes, leaving behind lifeless clay. Now, as word spread, the dig site transformed. What was once a quiet field became a magnet for attention. The Chinese government moved quickly, declaring the site a national treasure. Soldiers guarded the pits, and archaeologists worked day and night under floodlights. Villagers who once worried about water now lived next to the world's greatest excavation. And the public? By the late 1970s, whispers of the Terracotta Army were making their way across newspapers, museums, and television screens. around the world. People who'd never heard of Qin Shi Huang suddenly knew him as the emperor who had clay soldiers guarding his grave. The scale of the excavation forced tough decisions. Some pits were left untouched, too fragile, too risky to expose further. Others were slowly, painstakingly revealed. Each soldier lifted, repaired, and catalogued. Think of it, 8,000 warriors, each needing the patient hands of archaeologists and conservators, like doctors reviving an ancient army. One quirky human detail here. Many of the local farmers who had dug that well were suddenly thrust into fame. They signed autographs for tourists, sat for photos, and occasionally gave interviews. Imagine being a man who just wanted to water his crops and now finds himself at the heart of a global historical sensation. And in a way, the excavation revealed more than an army. It revealed the emperor's obsession, the scale of his ambition, and the sheer human labor behind it. Each clay soldier whispered not only of Qin Shi Huang's might, but of the thousands of artisans, laborers, and maybe even unwilling conscripts who had built this eternal army, one by one, under secrecy and silence. The farmers had found a well. The archaeologists had uncovered an empire. And you're sitting here, thousands of years later, walking the dirt aisles of Pit 1, brushing your fingers through the cool air between silent soldiers, standing in awe of a man who could command armies, even after death. You linger among the rows of silent soldiers, and the dust of centuries clings to your breath. By now, the picture of this underground army isn't just about military might, it's about artistry. Every crease in a sleeve, every curl of a beard, every rivet in a breastplate reminds you that behind Qin Shi Huang's vision were craftsmen who turned clay into immortality. This is where we shift focus, not on the emperor, not even on the archaeologists, but on the artistry and chemistry that made it all possible. But first, a soft reminder. If you've been enjoying this journey into the earth, do consider subscribing. It keeps these bedtime histories alive. And let me know, are you listening at night, under blankets, or during the day with a cup of tea? Either way, I'm glad you're here. The mainstream fact: the Terracotta Army wasn't just sculpted, it was engineered. Each warrior was made from local clay, shaped in parts. Legs were molded as hollow tubes, torsos built in sections, arms cast separately, and heads sculpted with careful variation. Think of an assembly line, but with artistry. Instead of identical mass production, you had modular parts combined with individualized detail. Once assembled, the figures were fired in kilns at high temperatures, making them as hard as brick. Now, the quirky detail. Archaeologists have found fingerprints pressed into the clay. Real fingerprints from 2,200 years ago, left by artisans as they smoothed a sleeve or adjusted a cheekbone. These tiny ridges, once belonging to some nameless craftsman, still whisper across the centuries. It's one of those things that collapses time. You're not just looking at art, you're seeing the literal touch of the hands that made it. And the chemistry, oh, that's where the mystery deepens. When researchers analyzed the weapons buried with the army, bronze swords, halberds, arrowheads, they found something astonishing. Despite being over 2 millennia old, many of them had barely corroded. Their edges were still sharp, their surfaces shining with a dark patina. Some swords could, in theory, still cut. This sparked a debate that still echoes in scientific journals. How did the Qin metallurgists achieve this? Early studies suggested the presence of chromium on the surface, leading to speculation that the Chinese had invented a form of anti-rust treatment, basically stainless bronze, 2,000 years before stainless steel. Imagine the buzz in the academic world. Was Qin Shi Huang's empire so advanced that they cracked chemistry secrets before anyone else? But as with most good mysteries, the story isn't so simple. Later studies argued that the chromium probably wasn't an intentional anti-rust coating, but rather contamination from the lacquer used on the wooden parts of the figures and chariots. The real secret to preservation, some say, lies in the soil itself, alkaline, rich in minerals that slowed corrosion. Others insist it was careful alloying and forging techniques by master metalworkers. The debate isn't fully settled, and it leaves you with that delicious uncertainty. Ancient genius, accident of chemistry, or a mix of both. The soldiers themselves were painted with bright mineral pigments, azurite blues, cinnabar reds, malachite greens, and even delicate purples. Purple was especially rare in the ancient world, yet here it was, brushed onto the armor of clay soldiers. Scholars believe this pigment, dubbed Han purple, was an artificial creation of Chinese chemists, possibly one of the earliest synthetic pigments in history. That's right. Long before industrial labs, someone in the Qin Empire was cooking up chemistry in furnaces, experimenting with compounds, and producing hues fit for an emperor. Of course, there's that heartbreak again. The colors vanished almost as soon as the warriors were exposed. The lacquer underlayer, crucial for binding pigment to clay, cracked and curled away when it met air. Within hours, centuries-old brilliance turned to dust. Archaeologists tried everything: resins, sprays, even humidity tents. But the paint slipped through their fingers like sand. It's a reminder that archaeology isn't just about discovery, it's about loss. For every wonder we see, there's 1,000 details gone forever. And yet, even in fragments, the craftsmanship shines. Hairpins in the soldiers' top nuts, tread patterns on their shoes, seams in their armor plates. It all speaks of specialized workshops. Some scholars think each group of figures came from a dedicated team, maybe even guilds. One for heads, another for torsos, another for weapons. In effect, Qin Shi Huang may have organized the world's first military-industrial complex. But for clay, there's even a more human angle. Ancient records suggest that artisans who worked on the emperor's mausoleum were sometimes trapped in secrecy, possibly even killed or entombed to prevent word of the project spreading. True or not, it casts a shadow. The same fingerprints you see pressed into clay might have belonged to someone who never left the mausoleum alive. Craftsmanship here wasn't just artistry. It was duty, sacrifice, and maybe even silence under fear of the emperor's wrath. So, when you stand in Pit 1, staring at rows of warriors, remember that you're not just looking at soldiers. You're looking at chemistry, at pigment, at metallurgy. You're looking at the fingerprints of forgotten artists and the chemical puzzles of an empire. The Terracotta Army is both a gallery and a laboratory, equal parts sculpture and science. And the whispers, they tell you this: clay can hold memory, metal can hold mystery, and sometimes, even in death, a civilization speaks through its craft. You stand again among the silent ranks, but this time, your thoughts wander away from the shimmer of bronze and the fingerprints in clay. You've already marveled at the artistry, the chemistry, the dazzling craftsmanship. But there's a deeper question that refuses to leave the room, one that has haunted scholars, tourists, and poets alike. Why? Why build an army of more than 7,000 life-sized soldiers, each unique, each carrying weapons, each ready to fight for an emperor already gone to dust? Before we dive into that, let me gently remind you, if you've been enjoying this long, dust-drenched journey, consider subscribing or leaving a review. It keeps the Bedtime history torch glowing. And if you're lying in bed listening, maybe let your thoughts drift to your own personal army of pillows. Much less intimidating than terracotta warriors, but still comforting. The mainstream fact: the Terracotta Army was almost certainly meant to guard Qin Shi Huang in the afterlife. Ancient Chinese beliefs held that the spirit world mirrored the earthly one. Just as kings and emperors needed food, servants, and soldiers in life, they would need them in death. Instead of human sacrifice on a massive scale, the first emperor turned to clay, assembling a spiritual army that would fight his battles beyond the grave. But here's the quirky detail. Some of the terracotta soldiers were positioned with real crossbows, chariots, and even cavalry horses sculpted in lifelike detail. This wasn't just symbolic art. It was a full battle order, as if Qin Shi Huang expected to march into another war campaign the very moment he crossed into the afterlife. Archaeologists even discovered evidence that some figures were arranged in specific military formations, as though they were ready to deploy against ghostly foes. Imagine being so ambitious that even death was just another military frontier. And that brings us to the scholarly debate. Was the army primarily spiritual or political? Was it a reflection of faith or of propaganda? Some scholars argue that the army was less about protecting the emperor's soul and more about making a statement to the living. Imagine the construction process itself. Tens of thousands of laborers and artisans, all watching this clay force grow day by day. What message does that send? That Qin Shi Huang's power was eternal, that even death couldn't strip him of military might. The mausoleum wasn't just a tomb. It was a theater of intimidation, visible not only to spirits, but also to subjects, rebels, and rival kingdoms who heard whispers of its scale. Others proposed an even subtler angle. The Terracotta Army might have been Qin Shi Huang's way of rewriting the ancient practice of sacrifice. Earlier dynasties often buried servants, concubines, and soldiers alive with their rulers. But by the 3rd century BCE, such practices were waning. Using clay instead of flesh might represent a shift, an evolution of ritual from bloody tradition to symbolic artistry. Was it mercy or just practicality? Some point to the vast labor and resources invested, suggesting it wasn't mercy at all, just efficiency. Clay doesn't revolt. Clay doesn't eat. Clay doesn't bleed. And then there's the wildcard theory, that the army wasn't meant to fight in the afterlife at all, but to serve as guardians, wards against spirits, demons, or perhaps even cosmic forces. After all, the emperor was famously obsessed with immortality, sending expeditions to seek elixirs of eternal life, swallowing mercury in his quest to cheat death. If you believed death was filled with dangers beyond human understanding, wouldn't you want 7,000 bodyguards carved from earth and fire? The debates don't end there. Some scholars suggest the figures weren't just guardians, but a symbolic map of the emperor's empire, a clay census, a microcosm of the Qin state frozen underground. Each soldier, each rank, each weapon might have represented the unity of the empire itself, bound forever around its founder. In that interpretation, the army isn't about afterlife war, it's about eternal order. The emperor literally embedding the empire into his grave. It's tempting to imagine Qin Shi Huang pacing through the site as it was built, his eyes flicking over endless ranks of clay soldiers, thinking, yes, this will do. This will remind both the dead and the living that I am never without an army. So, why the Terracotta Army? Was it faith, fear, propaganda, practicality? Maybe it was all of these at once. After all, Qin Shi Huang was nothing if not excessive. He unified China, standardized weights and measures, built roads and canals, began the Great Wall, and then ordered an army of clay to keep him company in death. The truth is, the Terracotta Army is both a question and an answer to the emperor's need for control, but a question to us. What do monuments mean when the man they served is long gone? You followed this story from mud-smeared peasants to the emperor's cosmic ambitions, from the dust of rebellion to the debates of scholars. Now, step into the present, where the Terracotta Army no longer stands hidden beneath fields, but under the bright lights of exhibition halls. The scene has changed, but the questions, the awe, the guardianship, those are still very much alive. Before we wander among modern crowds, a small reminder. If this journey has kept your imagination wide awake, you can help keep the lights glowing here by subscribing or sharing this story with another curious night owl. That way, you're part of the invisible crowd of listeners who keep these warriors standing tall in the land of stories. The mainstream fact. Today, the Terracotta Army is one of the world's most visited archaeological sites. Millions of tourists flock every year to Xi'an, filing into hangar-like pits where rows of soldiers stand silently, waiting. The effect is overwhelming. Visitors describe a hush falling over them, as though even chatter feels disrespectful in the presence of so many faces. The warriors are not behind glass. They are right there in the soil, half sunken in trenches, frozen mid-watch. The quirky detail. In the early years of tourism, there were actually reports of guards posted not just to watch the artifacts, but to watch the tourists. People tried to chip pieces of warriors as souvenirs. One man even attempted to walk into the pit at night, claiming he wanted to speak with the soldiers. Since then, the guardians of the guardians, modern security teams, keep a careful, almost ceremonial watch. Think of it, clay soldiers guarding an emperor, and human guards guarding the clay soldiers. The loop of protection never ends. And this leads us to the scholarly debate. How do you balance preservation with access? On the one hand, the Terracotta Army belongs to humanity. It is a marvel of art, engineering, and history, a window into a vanished world. On the other hand, every breath of air, every camera flash, every stray cough introduces dust, moisture, and pollutants that slowly eat away at the fragile pigments and clay. Archaeologists have long wrestled with this paradox. How do you let millions see something without destroying the very thing they came to see? Some argue for high-tech preservation. They propose sealing off sections of the pits, using climate-controlled domes, and limiting tourist access to digital experiences. Virtual reality could allow anyone to walk among the soldiers without the soldiers ever touching air. In fact, several museums around the world have already done this, sending traveling exhibitions of warriors so carefully restored and displayed that they almost seem alive, yet leaving the bulk of the army untouched back in Xi'an. Others insist that no matter how good the technology, nothing replaces the physical presence. Standing before 7,000 silent faces is different from wearing a headset. The scale, the weight of history, the chill of the underground pits. It matters. To see them in person is to share space with ghosts, and ghosts do not stream well through pixels. There's also a cultural guardianship at stake. For China, the Terracotta Army is not just an archaeological site. It is national heritage, a symbol of unity, strength, and even mystery. Local communities feel a sense of stewardship. Farmers who once plowed fields above the army now sometimes stand at gift shops, signing books, sharing their strange claim to fame as the men who first touched the buried soldiers. It's not just scholars and guards, it's a whole living ring of guardians, from villagers to officials to tour guides who memorize lines like priests repeating liturgy. And yet, the irony remains. The Terracotta Army was never built for crowds. It was meant to remain unseen, a silent company in darkness forever. To expose it to the gaze of millions is, in a way, to undo its original purpose. Some scholars whisper that Qin Shi Huang might not have wanted his clay legions on display, that in prying them from the soil, we've changed them from army to museum piece. But perhaps that's the destiny of monuments, built for one purpose, reborn for another. Clay once made to guard an emperor, now guards collective memory, standing vigil not just for Qin Shi Huang, but for humanity's endless curiosity. So, as tourists shuffle past, taking selfies, whispering to one another, craning necks to see the next row of warriors, the guardianship continues. Clay watching humans, humans watching clay. Two armies facing one another across centuries. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine it, the stillness of earth, the weight of centuries pressing down, And beneath it all, a silent army waiting. The Terracotta warriors have stood longer than empires, longer than dynasties, longer even than some of the languages we speak. They were built to guard one man, but in the end, they became guardians of something greater, memory itself. Before we take this final step together, a soft reminder: if this journey through history has stirred your thoughts or lulled you closer to dreams, you can keep the stories flowing by subscribing or by sharing this tale with someone else who drifts best when wrapped in the quiet hum of the past. The mainstream fact: the Terracotta Army is now recognized as one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that reshaped how we understand ancient China. It shattered the image of Qin Shi Huang as merely a tyrant, revealing instead a ruler with vision, obsession, and the ability to bend an entire civilization toward a single, awe-inspiring project. The quirky detail: even today, locals sometimes whisper superstitions about the site. Farmers joke that disturbing the warriors might bring bad luck, and some archaeologists admit to feeling uneasy working late at night in the pits. There are even tales of faint footsteps echoing where no one is walking, just the creak of the earth settling, or maybe, just maybe, the shuffle of clay soldiers repositioning when no one is watching. And here lies the scholarly debate. What do the warriors truly mean? Were they, as some suggest, a political statement of power, Qin Shi Huang showing not only his subjects, but the universe itself, that he commanded eternity? Or were they a genuine act of fear, a desperate man's attempt to bribe, confuse, or overwhelm the unknown forces of the afterlife? Some argue that they were both, propaganda and prayer, strategy and superstition, forged into clay with equal weight. But beyond debates and dates, there's something else these warriors carry, an echo that reaches you. Standing in their presence, you feel not just the might of Qin Shi Huang, but the presence of thousands of nameless hands, craftsmen, peasants, potters, blacksmiths, ordinary people whose fingerprints are still pressed into the clay, preserved by fire and the earth. They never knew their work would outlive them by millennia. They never imagined tourists, scholars, or dreamers would one day peer into the eyes of the faces they sculpted. And yet, here we are, gazing back at them. This is the real echo of eternity, not the emperor's immortality, but the immortality of human labor, imagination, and art. Clay, hardened into time itself. So, as you settle back, breathing softer now, imagine yourself in that great silent hall, where rows of warriors stand in dim light. Their shadows fall long across the floor, and the air smells faintly of earth, ancient and damp. You walk slowly between them, your footsteps hushed, and though they cannot speak, you feel their watchful silence wrapping around you, as if they know you have listened to their story. The emperor's dream was to command eternity. In a strange twist, he succeeded, but not in the way he expected. His army still marches, not in battle, but in memory, in whispers, in the dreams of those who wander into their presence. You too have joined that march now, so drift gently. Let the echoes of clay and time carry you. The warriors keep their watch, as they always have, and always will. Eternity is long, but they do not grow tired, and neither do stories you've walked through centuries tonight, through stone, clay, dust, and whispers of forgotten hands. Now, you can let the stories fade into stillness. Take a slow breath in and a long breath out. Feel your body sinking into the place where you rest. There is nothing more you need to do. The warriors keep their watch. The emperor's dream has been told. Your part now is to rest. Picture yourself in a quiet valley. The air is cool, touched by the scent of earth after rain. The stars are above you, millions of them, silent, ancient, and kind. Each one is like a lantern, glowing softly, just for you. As you breathe, imagine the weight of the day falling away, like dust shaken from a traveler's cloak. Every worry, every thought that clings too tightly, set it down on the ground. It can wait until morning. It will not follow you into your dreams. Your heartbeat is steady, like the distant drum of time. Your breath is gentle, like the wind that once brushed the clay army's faces. Even your thoughts begin to slow, like footsteps in sand that fade behind you. You are safe. You are watched over, not by soldiers of clay, but by the calm of the night itself. Here, there is only quiet. Here, there is only peace. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your breath grow softer. And as sleep comes, carry with you the calm weight of history, the reminder that time is long, and tonight is yours to rest within it. Sleep well, dream deeply, and let the echoes of eternity keep you company until morning.